It's December the 14th, 1992. Early morning and still dark. On a quiet road in Greater Manchester, a group of men are driving to work when they see something ahead of them, someone in the road. At first, they don't understand what they're looking at, but as they slow down, they realise it's a girl, and she's quite obviously severely injured. The girl has extensive burns, but strangely she isn't screaming or panicking. They immediately take her to a nearby house, from where she is rushed to hospital. There she is able to tell police what had happened and who was responsible, before falling into a coma from which she would never awaken. Her name was Suzanne Capper. She was just 16 years old. To fully understand this story, we have to understand who Suzanne Capper was and how she came to be in this tragic situation. People who knew Suzanne described her in very similar ways. She was kind, polite, and eager to help, the kind of person who would go out of her way to make others happy. But she was also vulnerable. She was later described as a gentle and easily influenced girl. She grew up in a difficult home environment. Her parents separated, and she moved between different households: her mother, her stepfather, and at times local authority care. That instability mattered, because Suzanne wanted what most teenagers want: a place to belong, a group of people who would accept her. And eventually she found one. But that in itself would have dire consequences. The group she became a part of centred around a woman named Jean Powell, aged 26. Jean had babysat Susan regularly since she was 6 years old, but there was a distinctly darker side to the woman. Powell lived at 97 Langworthy Road, Moston, a small Victorian terraced house where she also dealt drugs and was involved with the handling of stolen motor vehicles. In 1990, Suzanne had been placed in the care of the local authority after her mother, Elizabeth Capper, and her stepfather separated. When Suzanne was released from state care, she and her older sister, Michelle, went to stay with their stepfather. Around the same time, Suzanne began to play truant from Moston Brook High School, and her attendance during her final years of schooling was described as erratic and generally poor. It was during this same period that Suzanne began to spend an increasing amount of time at Jean Powell's house. Suzanne's sister Michelle had actually lived with Powell for a period of time, but had moved out in August 1992 because she did not like the evil new friends that Powell was associating with. Despite that, during her periods of truancy, Suzanne still began to spend increasing amounts of time at the house. Perhaps it might have seemed like somewhere lively, people coming and going, music and social activity, but underneath it was deeply unstable. The house was heavily associated with frequent visitors who were generally also involved in illegal acts. The living conditions were also chaotic and often dirty. However, Suzanne continued to skip school and go there. She helped around the house and looked after Powell's 3 children. She tried to be useful, and this in turn made her feel valued. But over time, something changed. Instrumental in the changes was one of the evil friends mentioned previously. This was Bernadette McNeely, aged 24. She had recently moved in 3 doors away at number 91 Langworthy Road. McNeely, who had 3 children, subsequently moved in with Powell and her 3 children. It was reported that the 2 women shared a bed in the downstairs dining room because the other bedrooms were full of children. Signs then began to appear that things weren't right. Suzanne was regularly being taken advantage of, expected to clean, to help, to give her time without anything in return. She was also bullied by McNeely and Powell. But in spite of this, Suzanne continued to stay over at the house. Her sister Michelle would later say that Suzanne didn't appear scared of them. just that she would do anything for them, pandering to their every whim. Her family became aware of the situation and grew concerned. At times they tried in vain to keep her away, but as in many situations like this, the full picture wasn't visible. They sensed something was wrong, but they just didn't know how wrong. At one point, Suzanne returned home after being assaulted and asked to stay. Unfortunately, she was turned away. That moment, small at the time, would later stand out as a turning point, a moment where things might have ended differently. And so Suzanne went back to Powell's house. And now I'm going to introduce some of the other key figures in this terrible tale. They were Glyn Powell, Jean's estranged husband; Jeffrey Lee, a frequent visitor to Jean's house where he regularly purchased amphetamines; Anthony Michael Dodson, Bernadette McNeely's 16-year-old boyfriend, who incidentally was also having a sexual relationship with Jean Powell; and finally Clifford Pook, Powell's younger brother. As time went on, tensions inside the group began to build. There were arguments, accusations, and increasing distrust. Whether it was a function of the twisted group dynamics, combined with the less than savoury characters surrounding her, Suzanne became the focus of the increasing angst. The atmosphere in the house shifted from uneasy to hostile. And then, in early December 1992, things crossed a line. On the 7th of December, Suzanne was lured to Powell's home under false pretenses. McNeely and Powell found Suzanne at her stepfather's home, and they managed to entice her to come to Langworthy Road, telling her that a lad she fancied was there. He was not. Glyn Powell and Dodson were there, however, waiting for her. And this time, she wasn't allowed to leave. She had effectively been kidnapped. The reasons for the abduction would later become clear. Firstly, Jean Powell claimed that Suzanne had tried to persuade her to sleep with an Arabic man, Mohammed Yusuf, who they had met in late November in Sale. Jean Powell said Suzanne encouraged her to have sex with the self-styled sheikh for money. She claimed she refused, and later told police she had given Suzanne a good hiding for trying to make me go with an Arab. Mr. Yusuf denied the entire story, so this was all thought to be untrue, but nevertheless Powell became angry. Next, in November 1992, McNeely and Dodson had contracted pubic lice. They both subsequently had to have their pubic hair shaved, and McNeely told Dodson she thought they had caught them from a bed that Suzanne had used. And finally, McNeely believed that Suzanne had stolen a pink duffel coat worth around £50 that belonged to her. Again, this was thought to be mistaken or untrue. At any rate, as soon as Suzanne arrived at the house, she was grabbed by Glyn Powell and Dodson. She was held down while they shaved her head and eyebrows, after which they made her clean up the hair and place it in a bin. She then had a plastic bag placed over her head before Glyn Powell and Dodson walked around her, taking it in turns to hit her on the head. Suzanne collapsed to the floor, at which point Jean Powell and McNeely proceeded to kick her, after which they took turns at beating her with a 3-foot wooden object, reported to be an ornamental spoon. They also both whipped Suzanne with a belt. She was then taken to the bathroom and forced to shave off her own pubic hair. Now, this was thought to be symbolic, a kind of ritual humiliation in revenge for having supposedly spread pubic lice, causing Dodson and McNeely themselves to be shaved. After they had finished beating and humiliating Suzanne, Powell locked her in a cupboard overnight. The following morning, Suzanne was dragged upstairs where she was locked in another cupboard. On the 8th of December, Suzanne was moved again, this time to McNeely's house. The concern was that Suzanne's crying would disturb Powell and McNeely's 6 children. In McNeely's house, she was taken to a downstairs back room where she was tied spread-eagled with electrical flex to an upturned bed. After this, the torture escalated and the group dynamic darkened. Over the next 5 days, Suzanne was subjected to a series of increasingly violent and brutal assaults. Both Powells, Dodson, and McNeely took turns in beating her over and over again. She was also injected with amphetamines an unknown number of times. She was burned on her face and legs with cigarettes. Music was inflicted on her at maximum volume through headphones. One song in particular was used repeatedly. Hi, I'm Chucky, Wanna Play by 150 Volts, featuring samples from the film Child's Play. It was reported that a sadistic McNeely would commence each torture session with the phrase, "Chucky's coming to play." During the 5 days, Pook and Lee called at the house where they were shown Suzanne, blindfolded, gagged and tied to the bed. By this stage, Suzanne, who had not been allowed to go to the toilet, had been lying in her own urine and feces. They untied her and placed her in a bath containing concentrated disinfectant. They then scrubbed her with a stiff brush, so hard as to almost remove skin. Clifford Pook then moved in. Whether he wanted some form of trophy is unclear, but what is known is that he decided to callously and brutally rip out 2 of Suzanne's teeth with a pair of pliers, teeth which police later found at his house. Dodson would later recount the terrible details. He said, "I saw Cliff remove her gag. He told her to open her mouth and said, 'Right, I'm going to rip your teeth out.' He hit her teeth with the pliers, and then he started pulling at them. One tooth just snapped and chipped, so he hit them a few more times. He then grabbed another tooth with the pliers and pulled really, really hard. He pulled Suzanne's head forward until there was a snap, and he had the tooth out. He did the same again, laughing all the time he was doing it." Forensic experts would later tell the jury Suzanne had suffered a deep burn between the eyes, probably caused by a cigarette. 2 front teeth had been struck and extracted shortly before death. It was thought that the teeth were pulled to make identification of Suzanne difficult. By that stage, it seemed the decision had already been taken to kill her. Now we can all imagine, I'm sure, what unimaginable pain and suffering this must have caused to Suzanne. And these actions speak to the sadistic nature of Clifford Pook and the group as a whole. It's a well-known psychological fact that in groups like this, events can very quickly spiral out of control as members of the group egg each other on. During Suzanne's captivity, there were also other missed opportunities to rescue her. At one point, an 18-year-old man, David Hill, was invited to the house. While he was there, he heard Dodson shouting in the back room. When he asked what was going on, Lee took him into the room to let him see Suzanne. Hill later said he was totally shocked and could clearly see that she was being tortured. He was later left alone with Suzanne for a short period, and he said, "She asked me if I could help, but I told her I couldn't. I asked who she was. She said her name was Suzanne. She asked me if I could untie her. I said I couldn't do anything." Hill would later claim that he was too afraid to intervene, saying, "I thought they would batter me. If I'd said anything, they'd all have got me, wouldn't they? I didn't know what to do. I was too shocked to do anything." Another missed opportunity arose when Lee and Dodson were helping Suzanne's sister's fiancé, Paul Barlow, repair his car, all the while knowing that she was being held and tortured in the house. Paul was later quoted as saying, "They could have told me there and then. The door would have been kicked down and I would have got Susan out. I did not think they were capable of such savagery. Now all I want is 10 minutes with them in a back room." Eventually, Suzanne's family, who had by this stage become increasingly worried about her disappearance, decided to file a missing persons report with the police. When the group got wind of this, they decided that Suzanne had to be moved. Suzanne was awoken in the early hours of the 14th of December 1992 and bundled into the boot of a stolen white Fiat Panda. She was then driven about 15 miles to a place called Werneth Low, near Romiley on the outskirts of Stockport. McNeely, Jean and Glyn Powell and Dodson were all in the car with her. It is alleged that McNeely was giggling during the entire journey, a measure, I think, of how evil this woman really was. When they arrived, Glyn Powell and Dudson dragged Suzanne from the car and pushed her through brambles and down a steep slope. McNeely was carrying a container of petrol and doused her with it as she lay on the grass. She then tried to set Suzanne alight, but when she failed, Glyn Powell and Dudson took over, eventually setting Suzanne on fire. As Suzanne lay there burning, I should think in absolutely excruciating pain, McNeely began to sing "Burn, Baby, Burn" from the Tramps' song Disco Inferno. What a sick and twisted mind this woman had. It would seem the four of them then assumed Suzanne to be dead, because they left her there and returned to Jean Powell's house, with a brief stop on the way to pick up some drinks. Lee and Pook were both at the house when they arrived, so the gang was all there, and they no doubt celebrated what they had done. But they had underestimated Suzanne's strength and her will to live. After her assailants had left the scene, Suzanne, who was suffering from extensive burns, managed to scramble back up the slope. She pushed through the brambles and staggered along the lane for about a quarter of a mile to Compstall Road. At 6:10 a.m. she was spotted in the road by Barry Sutcliffe and two of his colleagues, who were on their way to work. They could see immediately that she was very badly injured, but, as I indicated in my introduction, they were also quite taken aback. Suzanne wasn't screaming. She didn't appear to be panicked, and she even apologised and thanked them for stopping. I find that mind-boggling after what this poor girl had been through. They got her in their car and took her to a nearby house where they woke the residents, Michael and Margaret Coop, and asked them to call for an ambulance. Descriptions given later by the Coops illustrate the extent of Suzanne's injuries. Michael Coop was quoted as saying, "Both her hands appeared like ash, her legs were just like raw meat, and her feet appeared to be badly charred." But I was struck by how polite Suzanne was. She was constantly thanking my wife for her assistance. Margaret Coop remembered, "I instinctively went to put my arms around her, but she pulled away because she could not bear to be touched. Her head was shaved and there were recent cuts on it. Her face was almost featureless. Her hands were red raw and black at the fingertips. Her legs were red from top to bottom. She couldn't bear anything near them." Capper drank about 6 glasses of water, but these had to be held for her because of the injuries to her hands. When the ambulance arrived, Suzanne was rushed to Withington Hospital, and when gently questioned by police, she was able to give the names of her 6 assailants, as well as Powell's address, before falling into a coma. Because of the extent of her burns, her mother and father were unable to recognise her, but she was eventually positively identified by a partial fingerprint from her thumb, the only part of her hands not severely burned. While the information that Suzanne gave to the police would lead to the arrest of her attackers, sadly she would not live to see justice served. She passed away on the 18th of December 1992 without ever regaining consciousness. A murder inquiry was launched immediately, led by Detective Inspector Peter Wall of Greater Manchester Police. Based on the information Suzanne had given police, D.I. Wall instructed officers at 07:30 a.m. on the 14th of December to attend 97 Langworthy Road and arrest anyone that they found there. It was reported that Jean Powell and McNeely laughed and joked with each other as they were taken away, and initially all 6 denied any involvement in Suzanne's abduction, torture, or death. But, under questioning, Dudson, who had been persuaded by his father to tell the truth, cracked and began to talk. As Dudson started to relate what had happened, D.I. Wall, an experienced police officer, was stunned. He later said, "As the story began to unfold, we just couldn't believe it. I kept asking myself how one human being could do this to another." It was reported that other police officers wept as the extent of Suzanne's suffering was revealed, and both officers and civilian staff at the station collected cash to send flowers to Suzanne in hospital. On the 17th of December 1992, Manchester magistrates remanded the 6 accused into custody, charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. After Suzanne passed away, they were charged with her murder on the 23rd of December 1992. Now, before I talk about the trial, let's look at the inquest. It was opened on the 8th of January 1993 by Leonard Gorodkin at Manchester Coroner's Court. Dr. William Lawler, a Home Office pathologist, stated that Suzanne had suffered 75 to 80% burns. It was further recorded that Suzanne died of multiple organ failure due to the extent of the burns. The coroner went on to give his own opinion on the case. It is clear that this young girl must have suffered a great deal of pain and had no chance of survival. But she did fortunately survive long enough to give information which led to the people mentioned being charged with her death. The trial of Suzanne's sadistic assailants started on the 16th of November 1993. It went on for 22 days. Each one of the 6 denied murder, and in their evidence, each one of them tried to minimise and play down their role in the events that led to Suzanne's death. After retiring on the 16th of December 1993, the jury took less than 10 hours to reach its verdicts. Bernadette McNeely, Jean Powell and Glyn Powell were each convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with minimum terms of 25 years, along with lengthy sentences for conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and false imprisonment. Anthony Michael Dodson was also convicted of murder and detained indefinitely with a minimum tariff of 18 years, in addition to sentences for conspiracy and false imprisonment. Jeffrey Lee was acquitted of murder and conspiracy, but received a 12-year sentence after pleading guilty to false imprisonment, while Clifford Pook pleaded guilty to conspiracy and false imprisonment, but was acquitted of murder. D.I. Wall gave a statement to the press after the sentencing, where he said, "Psychological reports say that these are absolutely sane individuals. It's frightening that they are such ordinary people. There's nothing special about any of them." But the pain for Suzanne's family and friends did not end with the conclusion of the trial. Next came a slew of appeals. Lee appealed the length of his term and had it reduced from 12 years to 9. Dodson managed to get his sentence cut by 2 years on his first appeal, but unsatisfied he appealed again, and this time it was denied. Jean Powell and McNeely both had their sentences reviewed, but only McNeely got a reduction of 1 year. However, McNeely's story didn't end there. While serving her time at HMP Durham, where she shared a wing with Rosemary West and Myra Hindley, evidence came to light which indicated she was having an affair with the prison governor, Mike Martin. He managed to quit before they could take disciplinary action, and McNeely was promptly moved to HMP New Hall. Further things subsequently came to light about McNeely's past conduct. Her daughter Kelly and her son James were 7 and 5 respectively at the time of Suzanne's kidnap and murder. They would both later tell how their mother physically abused both of them prior to her conviction and incarceration. They would be tied to chairs and hit with a belt, among other abuses. Occasionally, they needed hospital treatment, and that, along with some public abuse, led to the matter being reported to the police and social services. But like so many cases, no firm action was taken. But another dreadful fact that might shock you even further is that after McNeely was jailed, as the children's birth mother, she retained some parental rights over them, despite them having been placed in foster care. This meant that McNeely could insist upon them visiting her in prison, a place that, in my opinion, no child should ever have to go. On one occasion, Kelly had to go to the toilet while there, and she was escorted to a toilet on one of the prison wings. While in the toilet, she noticed a woman staring at her. The woman was none other than Myra Hindley, one of the Moores murderers. I can only hope that because of her youth, Kelly was not fully aware of who the woman truly was. As an adult, Kelly is now campaigning for a change in the law, so that abusive parents lose all of their rights to see their children. I understand that these measures are being seriously considered. There followed much discussion in the media regarding the root causes of this atrocity, and things such as drug culture, tolerance of crime in society as a whole, and the existence of an underclass in Britain all came under scrutiny. I guess if you examine things enough, you can perhaps make changes to prevent things like this reoccurring. Sadly, though, all of that would be too late for Suzanne. I believe all of her assailants are now out of prison and were back on the streets as of 2023. They all remain on perpetual life license, meaning that if they commit another crime, they face being recalled to prison. They get to live the rest of their lives, but because of them, Suzanne didn't. Suzanne Capper was a sweet 16-year-old girl who just wanted to be liked, but she placed her trust in the wrong group of people. What happened to her didn't begin with violence. It began with her vulnerability and a need to belong. But in the end, when everything had been taken from her, she still made sure the truth was known. Our condolences go out to the family and friends of Suzanne for their terrible loss. May she rest in peace. And in conclusion, may I ask you to stay curious and stay safe. And thank you for watching.